if you're looking for great talent in the data and AI space, that it always has been scarce, then it definitely is still, a challenging situation to be in Europe. Few organizations outside the big tech players like Amazon and Meta and so on are aware of this market. I think sometimes there's a lot of that classical Dunning-Kruger effect being involved, where we as humans overestimate how creative or how capable we are, how original we are.
Paul, welcome to the Objective Hiring Show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tim. Great opportunity. Let's talk some hiring.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Let's jump in. And from your side, I'd love to get your perspective on just like a lay of the land of what the current hiring market looks like in Europe for data related roles, because I'm hearing a lot of pain points in different people in different countries. I'd just love to get your perspective on things.
Yeah, I think it's still just very much a tight market in my view, at least for the roles that I have been recruiting throughout my career. Definitely was even a tighter market, I think, with some economic softening that we expected and we already see. People tend to clinch to their current roles and to their current employers. So fewer people being willing to join and being hired by other players. So that definitely didn't help the situation. So if you're looking for great talent in the data and AI space, that it always has been scarce, then it definitely is still a challenging situation to be in Europe.
What about in terms of application volume? So one thing I've heard a lot recently, maybe more from North Americans, if I think about it now, but they're just being inundated with applications, sometimes hundreds, even thousands of job ads. And these are for individual contributor data roles I'm talking about. Is that a pattern you've also experienced?
I think the number of applications has not been in the thousands, but certainly we have seen a great variation over the years. But I think recently the number of applications, as stated, is definitely low. It's on the lower end that we receive, and I think in Europe it's definitely the economic uncertainty that kind of leads people to be hesitant, stay with their current opportunities and not rock the boat too much because you don't know what might be coming over the next year or two. And then, I mean, there's also the continuous competition from US players, especially for really the top-notch talent in the market. So salary there are very competitive. People want to stay there. They're not inclined to move over to Europe due to just the incentives purely. So I think it's a bit of a challenge situation if you're looking for great talent in the data and AI market, for the reason that there's some significant uncertainty in the market.
Okay, so even though there's maybe a bit higher unemployment compared to a couple of years ago, or that sort of peak pandemic period, even with that, the people who do have jobs are a little bit reluctant to even consider looking elsewhere because, as you say, there's this kind of growing uncertainty.
Yeah. I mean, say in Germany, you would have that sort of few month period where an employer can still, with a 4-week notice, end your new employment contract. And I think that for some people is enough of an uncertainty. Rather, they would want to stay with their current role. And just see what's coming, right? And then in 1 or 2 years, it might be a better situation to consider a new opportunity. Currently, similar to other business decisions, the uncertainty is making people very much stick to where they are at the moment.
And what about AI? The two most said letters in probably the history of the world by this point. Have you noticed any impact that it's had on hiring, either on the candidate side of things, or perhaps have you dabbled with some of the tools yourself in a hiring context?
Yeah, I mean, of course. Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, all of the impact and the applications that everyone is talking on the web, and people are speaking about automated CV screening, et cetera, et cetera. I think the same on the candidate side, and the applicants would be using AI to sort of draft their CVs or improve them. So I think based on that, there's a lot of automation going on. But I do think that still there are even more interesting applications or use cases for AI, where, for example, it can assist recruiters be it in the corporate sector or sort of elsewhere, to understand better the roles and the markets where to look for certain talent, given a specific part of sort of a specific skill set. I think it's not used there as widely as for automating some of the boilerplate tasks, right? Like CV screening, et cetera, et cetera. I think the most interesting applications probably actually are in sort of, the needs identification stage of recruiting, when it comes to where should we be looking for candidates, how should we be positioning in the market, how should our job ad look like, right? These kind of things are also very interesting, I think very impactful applications of AI in the recruitment process.
And are these things you've already seen attempted, or you feel like this is an unexploited territory that you feel like there should be some change in soon?
I mean, at least what I know and what I see in the corporate sector, but also in consulting, I think it is not used as widely and as much as it should be. Right? In the automation part, yes, right, like for the handling of of recruitment documents along the life cycle, then yes, but before even receiving applications and, as I said, identifying where we should go, what are the market places for talent that we're looking for, there it certainly is underutilized. And I mean, let's make an example. I think many tech players are looking for very niche talent in, for example, causal AI. And one thing that I think I was surprised to learn is that many recruiters are not aware that there are, for example, economists being very much trained in that space. And there's an annual job market by the American Economic Association, for example, where PhD candidates go. And they're on the market, they can be interviewed. Few recruiters, few organizations outside the big tech players like Amazon and Meta and so on are aware of this market. And I think and I've just tried that before our meeting, if you kind of go into a conversation with ChatGPT or any of the other language models out there, if you look for that specific skill set, then that is being mentioned as one of the markets that you should be looking for and where people recruit top talent. And that kind of back and forth with an AI, I think, can be very helpful at that stage of the recruitment process.
This is really interesting to me because this is not something I know much about. So I'd like to drill down a little bit more here. So you're saying there's like a sub-market of economists who have a skill set that overlaps with the requirement in AI and data science. And they're not necessarily going to apply to a job ad through LinkedIn or through a careers page. They're in some other network that could be tapped into to exploit.
Exactly. And just being aware of who are the people in that network, where does it exist, what are events around it, I think that is something where it can really provide you a much broader view on what is out there. And that's what few people use it for.
That's really interesting. I wonder if, thinking about it now, there's probably equivalent other pockets of communities. This could be like Slack channel groups, maybe not as popular now as they used to be, but probably Telegram channels as well. I know someone I spoke to recently has about 2,000 Telegram followers on a little analytics pool in their bit of the world. And so, yeah, there's probably these little subgroups around the place that don't really fit into a mass market jobs board. And so it'll be easy to neglect them. There's not like there's a full ecosystem built up, but you could tap into it if you were clever and cunning. And yeah, ChatGPT would be a way to, I guess, identify them in the first place, but also you could customize the messaging to appeal to them and all sorts of things, I suspect.
Yeah, exactly. And especially in sort of, long-standing corporate organizations and recruiting and HR, they probably know their niche. They have been recruiting in for 1 or 2 decades, right? And now with data and AI, many of them now need to break into new kind of roles they have not recruited before. They might not be acquainted where to look for that type of talent. And I think, that's a stage at which there could be much more use of AI than there currently is.
I personally have to say I've flipped over the past 6 months probably of being maybe a little bit skeptical of AI and feeling a little bit like it's overblown to the polar opposite. So I'm bought into the hype, and I feel like in particular there's so many things in hiring that could be drastically improved with current state LLMs. And so I feel like we're just kind of waiting. We'll have to wait maybe the next 6 to 12 months for the application layer to catch up that actually implements these LLMs in some kind of new wave of AI-driven ATSs or HR tech, because all the existing products are really built for what I think now is an old world where it's just a human sitting there clicking buttons, moving stuff around, and that world has to end. I think we can move on from that one. And oh my god, if I just thought about each of the steps in hiring, so many of them could be either automated or greatly enhanced or improved with AI. For example, I feel like feedback in a live human interview is pretty good option for AI, because at the moment, most companies wouldn't provide feedback after an interview for many reasons. One of which is, I think, just the notes and the transcripts from those meetings are often hacked together. Like the last time we did research about this, which was only 18 months ago, 20% of all interviewers used a pad and pen, like literal paper, to write their interview notes. And so already the technology is there to record and transcribe those meetings with near perfect accuracy, summarize it. And you can imagine sharing that with candidates, sharing it internally. And that would seem like such a no-brainer to me.
True. On the other hand, I think, I'm probably still more of a traditionalist in the sense of, I still call people after recruitment interviews to provide feedback. So I think a lot of the candidates that I speak to and that I have interviewed, they appreciate that formal and personal feedback. Of course, you cannot scale that to, if you have thousands of applicants. But yeah, if the process allows, then I am very much inclined to make it a personal exchange via phone or by email. Appreciate it cannot always be scaled to that level, but I think if it can be done, I would always do it and rather opt for some personal feedback rather than automated via AI. And I think yeah, especially in the consulting realm, for example, it's a people business, and yeah, candidates value this very much. Especially also when it comes down to the level where some players in the market, I think they leave it to assistants to call back candidates that they probably don't want to proceed with. That's also something that I haven't done in the past, and the feedback to that was always very, very positive. So there's some, level of human interaction that I think will also help to build long-term relationships. Maybe that changes for the new generation of people who are used to AI, and it's certainly fine to get AI generated feedback as a summary of a call. But I think my recent experience is that still people are very impressed if you manage to really get back with personal feedback to them. So would always be preferred if I had to choose.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree that that would be better from a candidate's perspective. And yeah, good on you for doing that, because you're definitely in the small minority, I think, of people who would consistently give actionable feedback. And I like that you call them, because that's clearly a harder thing to do. It's more valuable, it's more effort. It gives the candidate an opportunity to also ask follow-ups. And I feel like if you can deliver it tactfully, it's going to come across a lot better than something written, which just you could immediately be defensive against. So yeah, kudos to you for doing that. And then I think about other processes in other companies where it's not happening. And for at least a section of those, I think it's too much effort. They're drowning in interviews, especially once they get to an end of a day and they've interviewed 6 people. They haven't written good notes in some system. It's kind of all over the place. And also just the mechanism to share it, I feel like is also broken. Like in bigger companies, it's hiring manager writes it, they email it to HR. HR then eventually has to tell the candidate, but there's a delay process before they wait for other. Yeah, God, this whole mess, I think, could be just transformed completely with maybe good enough feedback from AI.
Totally. I mean, every meeting being transcribed by Copilot, for example, yeah, it's super helpful in every business context, and I think you're right. Would be very valuable for candidates where personal feedback just can't be mapped due to the sheer amount of applicants that you would have to get back to, and that's still better than just not letting them know anything, or just sending them a standardized email, right? Yeah, totally.
I wonder, just thinking now, what else will be the barrier? Because I feel like the technical barrier is now solved with large language models and accurate transcriptions. There's going to be an application built that could push this data around and the logic to when to send it to a candidate and whether or not we want to sort of synthesize it. So, for example, I know when I'm writing interview notes manually myself, they're a little bit incoherent and sometimes very direct and harsh. So you can imagine some kind of layer to soften the blow and massage it, make sure we don't send anything that's defamatory or whatever. I feel like that bit should be solvable right now. But what else? Like, I wonder if some companies will still be worried about giving feedback. Like maybe there's some legal repercussions. I've heard of companies in America who just say, well, we don't give feedback at all. Like, are there going to be other barriers, do you think?
Well, from my experience, no, we always have been very transparent around that feedback. I think it could also help us or help anyone to keep everyone in the process honest, right? If you're discussing a candidate in the group after the whole recruitment day, you compare candidates, if you have like an AI supported transcript of what they said and what they performed, what the responses were, I think that can help also to keep things fair, right? Because of course, there's also some human, layer to this where people might have an intrinsic preference for one candidate over the other. But then if you put that next to the transcript, then that can help keep things honest. So I don't see that as a barrier for use. Maybe it should be something that should be even be more widely for it. But I think it's definitely a great use case to make sure that candidates receive tailored feedback that actually builds on the content and what has happened in the recruitment interview themselves, rather than being generic, being one-off for every candidate.
I like your idea of keeping people honest and also tapping into a data set that at the moment is completely missed in the whole hiring process, and that is those meetings you might have to discuss several candidates. So you have, a CV screening stage and an interview, and they're quite discrete and specific, but often there's these kind of offline conversations where you might unpack a whole series of candidates. And yeah, having a transcription of that and an AI to look at that and, as you say, keep people honest could be so valuable. In particular, I feel like a really common problem is you'll be discussing all these candidates. And so I've experienced this as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, you'll be discussing candidates with different people. And it's so easy to forget what it is that you're looking for in the first place. And so if you always had the objective criteria there, your conversation, and almost like hey, like you kept talking about this candidate not being, not being extroverted enough, as if that's a bad thing. But hang on, there's nowhere in your criteria is their personality, that whether or not they're introverted or extroverted. And so it's so easy for kind of reasonable sounding things to creep into the decision process that in fact probably shouldn't be there. And so, yeah, some kind of, maybe not monitoring, it's a bit too aggressive, but some kind of feedback tool from AI could be really helpful. That's, a really interesting idea.
Yeah. And summarization, right? I mean, if you interview a couple of candidates every day, then you might not remember each and every good answer or bad answer or red flag that sort of came up in the interview. And having that handy, having that being ready, and even interactive, right? I think you can think of systems that you can prompt to say, hey, how did that candidate perform again? What were some of the highlights in the conversations we had? Those things are perfectly possible. So I think you could infuse at various stages of the process, and it's underutilized. I mean, you might know it better than I do what is some of the recruitment tech that you have out there, but I have personally not seen that being so and sort of every single stage of the conversations that you have, and sort of making transcripts available and so forth.
Yeah, that, to my knowledge, certainly doesn't exist yet. And yeah, that's a really exciting angle to think about it, because if the whole recruitment process was digitized, recorded, and transcribed, you could have that kind of holistic view across a candidate who, of course, goes through several rounds, and you might not remember what they said in the first round, and there's different interviewers involved, and they've all got their own experiences. So some holistic picture of all those interviews, some summarization, some synthesis, some like recurring themes. That would be really, really insightful, and I think a huge value add compared to the way we currently do it.
And I think it doesn't even end there, right? In an ideal world, you would probably even build up a data set of candidates over time, right? And you can grade them at the curve. And sometimes the LLMs are surprisingly good at, really sort of semantically interpreting what people said. I could imagine they would be reasonably be well also at grading, like, for example, a consulting case that we do with people on interviews and say, hey, that candidate performed well. Yeah, that candidate performed even better. And if you keep a track record of all these transcripts, then maybe you can come to a system where if you have a certain candidate and you take their transcript, their solution, their answers, that you ask the LM, how does that compare to the history of candidates we had over the past 1 or 2 years? That would be all really interesting as well, right? And very, or I would feel more objective than some of the current grading that you have with different people, very subjective assessments of interview performance, et cetera, et cetera. It would then at least be one single kind of evaluation system that stand behind us.
Yeah, there's just so much upside, and I'm really now quite excited to see what happens in the next few years because I don't know about you, but I feel like the concerns over AI are fair enough, and especially in something as important as hiring. But I just feel like the way hiring is done at the moment is so flawed in so many different ways. But it's hard to imagine how we're going to make it worse by implementing a well thought through AI solution. I feel like there's just so much upside and not that much downside because we're already near the bottom. Maybe I'm being especially cynical, but like I just see so many gaps and flaws with how hiring's approached, and it's on the spectrum of science to astrology. I feel like it's a lot closer to astrology than science.
Yeah, see, it's similar to when people compare sort of how AI is performed relative to humans on creative tasks, for example. I think sometimes there's a lot of that classical Dunning-Kruger effect being involved, where we as humans overestimate how creative or how capable we are, how original we are. And in a similar vein, it might be that we overestimate how biased we underestimate how biased we are relative to an AI. I totally see the risk that people see with amplifying bias and training data through AI. But I think to your point, I have not yet seen a clear comparison between how biased is a process if we are human only versus AI system, right? Is it more? Is it less? And to your point, I think the reality is that a lot of the hiring processes are not as good as we would like them to be, not as unbiased as we would like them to be. And I also think that it can hardly get any worse. It probably would get better if we had some of these systems support the whole process. So, yeah.
I've got one particular example which I like to share just because I feel like it speaks to the current mess that we're in quite poignantly. And so I'm sure you've seen studies like this where researchers get a whole bunch of different CVs or resumes of candidates, and they split them into groups with the only difference among the groups being the names on the CVs. So one recently in Australia was done by the University of Sydney, where they had 3 groups of thousands of CVs. First group had an Anglo first and surname. Second group had a Anglo first name, Chinese last name. The third group had Chinese first and last name. They then applied to thousands of different jobs around Australia, different industries, different domains, senior, junior, like a wide variety, and then measure the rate at which their application got a callback for an interview. And so for the first group, which had Anglo first and surname, they got a 12% callback. For the third group that had a Chinese first and last name, they got a 4% callback. And they did a very good job from what I could tell at, considering all the other variables and controlling for obvious reasons why there might be a difference in callbacks, such that the only real difference was the names on the CVs. And so if you're Chinese in Australia, you have 1/3 the chance of a callback for a similar CV to someone with a white name. That is dreadful. If I was Chinese, I would be pissed off because that's just, call it what you like, unconscious bias or overt racism. It's like not good enough. And so if that's the current system, I fail to see how it could be more broken than that with a well thought through, well implemented, transparent bit of AI, personally.
I can only second that. I mean, there have been similar studies, I believe, by economists when it comes to sort of racial discrimination based on names, et cetera, et cetera. I think, if I remember correctly, there was a Harvard professor called Zenda Melanathan who had a paper on that being published a couple of years ago. So yeah, I think those are kind of discriminations that have been in the market and have been documented here and there, and that's why I think the human process is not as ideal as we would like it to be, and therefore, what are we really comparing to when we compare this to an AI assistant process isn't entirely clear to me, and I think there's a lot of very heroic assumptions around how unbiased the human process is out there. Yeah.
Thinking about it now, I wonder if one of the difficulties with this is, unlike, let's say, where we're trying to improve the rate at which we can detect, cancer in a patient. And so we have a current human way of doing it with a certain level of accuracy and recall and those typical metrics. And so we know the false positives, false negatives of a good doctor. And then we just train an AI to try to be better than that. And it's very black and white, like either they had cancer or they didn't. But in hiring, we don't really have an equivalent success metric, because it's not like who was a good candidate, the one who got hired, the one who got tested and had the best skills. If they got hired, is that success? What happens if they got fired? What happens if they got promoted? If they left for a better job, is that good or bad? So it's just the thing we would optimize for, I guess, isn't as obvious. Is that part of the problem? Maybe.
Totally. But I think, interestingly, it gets us back to causal AI and causal inference. I think that's exactly why you have these experiments where people take CVs that are basically the same. You just change the name for something that sounds foreign or that has, a similarity with a certain demographic group, and you see whether people just react to that change. Well, all of the skills, all the hard skills, all of the education is just exactly the same, right? And you get that randomization that basically enables you to say, this is the only difference between these two CVs, but this one really got a substantial, bigger return rate. And but those kind of experiments you need to run in order to gauge the impact of these kind of demographic or other features of a candidate, in order to say, hey, that's actually something where we see a discrimination that we would not want to see in the process, right? This is not because someone has been to a more prestigious school or because someone has a higher degree, but this is just because it is a certain demographic group, and that's not okay. So, and that's why I think these studies, some of which I've mentioned earlier, became so prominent, because they made this very clear that there isn't anything else at play other than the demographic background of individuals.
One thing I've also seen recently is an extension of this type of analysis, but within a company or within an organization, on promotions. So not necessarily the hiring decision, but whether or not someone gets promoted. I saw recently someone in my network did very comprehensive analysis over 20 years of Australian public service promotions. It's like 100,000 data points, the entire population. And they found what I could only describe as catastrophic bias against people from English as a second language background, especially Asian Australians, whereby if you're in that group, your odds of getting a promotion, controlling for so many other relevant factors like the number of years of experience you have, your performance reviews, your education level, your language skills, like all the obvious things you'd think of, they controlled for. They're economists econometricians who are doing the research, so that they know their stats. And just, having looked at all that, they just found this straight up ridiculous levels of bias. So it's not just in the hiring decision, it's also, unfortunately, sometimes in the organization as well.
I think, there's a lot of politics involved in these decisions anyway, right? I think they're not, or probably to a smaller degree than we would like to, skill-based or performance-based, right? Much of this is also a political decision, be it who you would like to see take the reign of a company or lead a certain group within your organization. Totally, right? I mean, that's not neutral. So I imagine, or I don't find it very hard to imagine that that's the case. And I think there's also some glass ceiling for women traditionally across organizations. So I think we've documented many of these throughout, and like I say, no surprise. And it could be that AI could help to counter this, right? To provide sort of a more neutral voice in the room, still maybe not unbiased, but a more neutral voice than the other ones in the room that make that decision, to the point where it might actually turn the decision to a different candidate. And yeah, it definitely sounds like a promising application, because, like I say, can hardly get worse.
One thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is the fact that, at least from what I've seen, typically in talent acquisition and HR teams, the background of people leading those functions in an organization would rarely be from data, from a technical field, from a scientific field. And so I know just from 6 years of working in this field that proposing a sort of more data-driven way of doing hiring is anathema, and it's the polar opposite of what they think is the right way to go. And so they'll normally say something like, "Oh, we prefer a more human approach to hiring," as if that's sort of the opposite of a numbers, objective, measurable approach. They almost view that the numbers and the metrics as slightly that's unfair. There's almost a perception that the tests are the bits that are biased, as opposed to the humans that are bits that are biased, which I've always found a little bit interesting. Is there a sense that maybe there's a skill gap in talent and HR because they don't even view the lens through a scientific approach, a data-driven approach, and AI for them is adding bias as opposed to getting rid of it? That's their starting assumption. Is this a problem, do you think?
I think it's a good question. I think the better skills or more skills and sort of a more data-driven way to recruitment certainly don't hurt. But I think there's only so much that you can quantify and that you should quantify and base a hiring decision or probably even a promotion decision on. I do see that in reality, it will always be kind of a mix, right? Because people also need to somehow fit into a team, somehow be relatable in most jobs, right? Imagine you have a brilliant scientist, someone who is just not very much a team player, right? Who is great at inventing stuff, that he has a very irritating personality. It will be very hard for certain roles for such an individual to really thrive in an organization. So it may be that person hits all of the top grades in a quantitative evaluation, but then if you adopt it like the team lens, you already know it will create problems in your team because that person is likely going to irritate a lot of people in the organization. So I think it's fair to blend both views. But I find it hard to say where, like in practice, where are we on the spectrum of like being completely not data-driven versus fully automated? I would like things to be somewhere in the middle, but I think different organizations are at different ends of that spectrum. When more data-driven hiring would be improving the situation and helping them also, whereas some might already do enough, and you can only go so far. I think certainly for roles in consulting or other sort of network-related positions, you do need people who also can relate to other people, who can build a relationship on a personal level, and it's hardly quantifiable, right? It's something that you kind of learn through interaction, conversations, and you build a view of whether that person has what it takes to kind of build a relationship and relate to someone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'd love to drill down a little bit further here then. So I appreciate that, some of those, let's say, softer skills bordering on cultural fit, like imagining how this person would interact with a client, is clearly something you need to engage in some kind of interview, face-to-face or over a video call. You couldn't infer that really from a CV. You can't really test for that directly, I don't think. You have to kind of see it and make the human judgment. That said, what I feel like is sometimes when companies are evaluating these subjective things, they do it in a way that makes it almost more subjective than it has to be. And so I'll give you an example. So imagine you have like a cultural fit interview. You could just have that as like, oh, go and have a coffee with them and see whether or not you like them interview. And then the person comes out and it's either a yes or a no based on a kind of vibe called the vibe interview. Okay. Or you could say, well, here's these 5 values we're looking to hire into our team because they're our company values. Here's 2 questions for each of these values. Here's an example of a great answer to one of these questions. Here's an example of a poor answer. Score them on a scale of 1 to 5, add it up, and then whoever has the most has the best cultural value match based on however your values are defined. I mean, I feel like that is a more objective way to do something that is inherently subjective than the just pub test, coffee chat vibe. What do you think of that approach and those kind of trade-offs?
I don't think I haven't seen or heard even of these sort of vibe interviews. They may be out there. I haven't heard of it. Definitely has not been part of any of the recruitment processes I have been part of. But I think in any case, right, there's only so much that you could quantify as part of the recruitment process and that you can learn. At the end of the day, especially if you recruit not just super senior level, but also entry level positions, you need to adopt a long-term perspective. So you need to somehow trust and believe and place a bet on an individual to also grow into the role that you're looking to fill, right? And I don't think you can see that right on the spot, right? You might find this curious person, they have been doing different things in the past and sort of have shown a tendency to explore different areas. That's fine. But still, you're placing that bet on an individual to go into your organization and grow and find a place and develop in a certain area. I don't think you can create certainty around that. So there will be some subjective assessment of whether you believe that person will definitely reach that point and sort of treat that development path. And I think that's where the subjective thing comes in, where you need to extrapolate based on what I hear, the individual that I see, reflecting on the team that we have. Do I believe that will work out, right? And I think it's also a pressure on those that sit on the other side that recruit and make the decision to basically be calibrated well to find someone and place that bet on someone who will then also take that trajectory as intended, because it's something that you cannot be sure about after an interview or a recruitment day or whatever.
Yeah, that is one of the other fundamental challenges with hiring, isn't it? That you have, even if you have an elongated process, like 4 interviews, still probably only 4 hours interacting with a candidate. You could have different interviewers to get a sort of wisdom of the crowds. You could overlay AI, you could have a structured process, but at the end of the day, it's still a tiny sample size of data. I wonder then if, thinking about it now, another use of AI might be obtaining other unstructured data about the candidates. For example, if they have a YouTube channel, if they have done a few podcasts before, if they've written, I don't know, a Stack Overflow answers, they've got a GitHub profile, if they've done a Medium blog. That kind of data might add some value, but it's just very difficult to hunt down, to aggregate, to synthesize. So maybe that might give you almost like an interview plus, like some kind of extra data points. I guess we'd have to do it though in a fair way that isn't going and finding a Facebook post that they added when they were 15, which probably shouldn't be included. What do you think?
Well, to a certain degree, these platforms have some KPIs that you can already use, right? That are somewhat neutral, say how many commits people have done on a GitHub profile, how many people have actually used the code that they have produced, maybe. These kind of things are quote unquote somewhat objective, especially if it comes around, how many people have actually used your code, your application, therefore did have built on it, that kind of thing, right? So that I think is a relatively good assessment of your skills in that particular area. But it comes down to very specific, very technical things, right? So the whole coding, data science area, like GitHub, etc., they provide these kind of metrics that you can track, but other than that, how you have performed in previous internships. You probably have some evaluation from a candidate from a previous employer, but that's about it, right? And how neutral IDs, how unbiased IDs, hard to say. But I think you're raising a great point insofar as that it's maybe worthwhile to think about, as a decision maker that hires, to sort of capture your thoughts and to sort of capture some of the data points around a candidate and build a track record. And when you come to the point whether you want to hire someone, you look at what has worked in the past. What were your beliefs in the past? Were you well calibrated, right? Have you predicted, like a coin flip, whether someone will actually be in the organization for another 2 years, or have you been actually very good at identifying those that actually thrives in the organization or not, right? Just providing that track record on how hiring has been able to identify successful candidates would already be helpful to calibrate and find how well does the hiring process even work for the organization, right?
Yeah, and I wonder then if an improved, let's say, HR 2.0 system would view hiring more holistically, because at the moment, these systems are normally like job ad through to offer most of the time. But really, there's onboarding, there's training, there's probation period, there's all the subsequent reviews and all the work that they're doing. And surely something that's more holistic that can see further through time would be better. Even something as simple as like, oh my God, all the stuff we learn about a candidate in a hiring process, surely some of that should inform then what their first day looks like or what their training looks like, because we should have learned already about some of their skills gaps or what they're interested in or what have you. And so having a centralized place for that data synthesized might be a big help again.
Yeah. But I think, you're raising a really good point that I have also mentioned in some of the client conversations when we were talking to clients around how to use AI in the HR process. I think you're highlighting very rightly that it's not just about recruitment, right? HR, of course, is also around, what happens in the organization with those that have been hired, that have been with the firm for many, many years, and probably also those that exit due to retirement or that move on to the next opportunity. And what I say is that basically, why would HR not be the custodian of all of that knowledge that has been generated over the course of all of those careers? And I think it's probably up to HR to kind of fill that gap and say, we can use all of these AI agents, we can use, Copilot and Microsoft kind of systems that tap into all of the documents, all the things that we have written to help people on board, right? You have some AI assistant that you can query before coming onto a new project, joining a new department. And you're not losing that great deal of experience that someone from your organization has developed over the years, and that he or she is leaving and moving on, and it's kind of gone, right? I think that's where much of the value sits from my perspective when using AI and thinking about especially language models to maintain knowledge repositories and take like this whole knowledge management process to a new level.
That's a really interesting angle I never thought about. So you're saying even if someone has left the organization, we should still be able to get value out of what they contributed through time, and knowledge shouldn't walk out the door with them, in a sense.
You retain it basically. Yeah. I think with nowadays technical possibilities, you can certainly retain it to some level. It's not going to replace that person. It's not going to sort of be like they were still around, but you can definitely make a lot more things available that are captured in unstructured data that will be helpful for those who take on the role, or those who join the firm and should be acquainted with some specific area that a previous employee has been working on. And I think there is not so much being done in that space currently, and a lot more could be done. But if you extrapolate several years into the future, maybe several decades, then there might be a point where you can actually retain all of that knowledge and almost like duplicate or spawn a surrogate of a previous employee and kind of really retain that in the organization.
Especially if you got a trailing commission, if your bot has just been trained on you and all your intelligence, if you get a clip of its value, there you go. There's a cool idea for someone to implement.
I mean, it raises a lot of interesting questions, right? Like you say, is it around permission and sort of, being replaceable. But yeah, I think knowledge and people, one of the biggest assets that firms have nowadays. I think that's what we have been saying for decades now. And we have very interesting new technological means to retain that in an organization that I think are not used that much as of now.
Yeah. Again, I'm just so excited about what we see in the next few years. So I feel like, the large language models have improved so rapidly. And now we're just waiting a little while for all the applications to be built on top of it to actually make them interface with other tools and be accessible by people. So it's super exciting. What about, Paul, if you had the proverbial magic wand? AI at the moment feels like magic to me, but doesn't have to be AI. If you had the proverbial magic wand and you could change one thing about the hiring process, what would that one thing be?
I think it would definitely help if we could get around the situation where we select candidates that are just not fit for the organization, right? I think it's that whole mismatch kind of thing. That's like the Gordian knot to me, both for the organizations as well as the candidates, right? I think if you could somehow improve, even if it's just a little bit, I think every single little gain here would go a long way. To improve the matching between a candidate and an organization, I think that will help. People stress, I have seen a lot of people stress and suffer under finding out early on that they have made a wrong choice, be it on the organization side or the candidate side. So I think there's a lot of dead weight loss here. And therefore, if there was anything that I could do about that, then I would definitely take my magic wand and say, it's always going to be a perfect match.
We mentioned dead weight loss, like the good economist that I'm assuming you are then in your background. To continue that theme then, like I wonder if, like, do we already know enough about what predicts whether or not someone's going to be a good hire? It's just a matter of measuring everything. So we have our regression, we've got our 6 factors that matter: their personality, their IQ, their skills, their soft skills, their cultural fit, whatever those variables are. And maybe at the moment the barrier is it's just so expensive and time consuming to collect all that data. Like you can't spend 6 months interviewing a candidate. You can't give them 10 hours of work to do. Another way to put it is everyone knows within a week, probably, if they've made the wrong hire. But it's just those things don't manifest themselves often in the hiring process because people are on guard. They're not really being themselves. As I said, you can't measure everything directly. So is it a case of just we need some intermediary that's going to measure all these things once for every candidate and then share them with every company rather than a candidate going through the same laborious process again and again? I don't know. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think totally correct, right? And that's I think, we have sometimes have like internships and all that where people kind of, they work for you for a little bit. And then as they graduate out of university, for example, they already know that organization works for them, and the organization knows that that's a viable candidate. And certainly that has been a vehicle that I have seen work very well for both sides. So that's why I encourage, especially people who are still in university, to take every opportunity because it's very cheap, actually, and it gives you a lot of information and can really take much of the burden from making a wrong choice from you and provide a lot of certainty. So I think there are these kind of possibilities that we have, and I can only encourage people to definitely make use of them because that's the easiest way you can get around that uncertainty for both sides, really, right? Where you have some limited time where if it's a match, it's a match. That's great. But if not, then we can both move on and no big loss. But of course, if you're a young professional, if you have been in the job for a while, you probably not want to take an internship for a couple of months in between before moving. So that doesn't become an option anymore later down the line. But for those who are still sort of in university or in their education or training, I would definitely encourage to use that to get around a bit of that sort of uncertainty that you have if you just meet for a day or two and then have to place a bet on whether that's a good relationship or not.
Yeah, that was certainly helpful for me. My first internship told me I definitely was not cut out to work in corporates. And they certainly thought I wasn't cut out to work in corporates as well. So the feeling was mutual. And so that was helpful. And that's fine. You certainly have to have the maturity to be able to handle that, which is probably hard when you're young, I think. But I feel like the more transparent hiring processes were, the better off we'd all be if we can just come into the first meeting and go, this is everything about the job. Cool. This is everything about me. And just get it out of the way rather than having these facades and masks on all the time. I feel like we'd be better off.
And I mean, I think many people adopt the perspective that in a recruitment process, you should also, as an employer, try to gloss over many of the things that might be less interesting or part of the job, be it long hours or be it certain activities that not everyone likes. I personally take the stance that it's better to be open about that, also in the recruitment stage and in the job interviews, so that you avoid that situation where people find out, oh, actually, that's not for me. Had I just known, and it's also some loss, though it's a big loss actually, also financially quantifiable. If you then go on hiring someone who, if you had just been open around, how the job profile, how the day to day looks like, that person would have probably not joined the firm, and you would have probably selected someone else who was a better fit.
Exactly. I agree completely. It's just all about expectations management, isn't it? It's the way to avoid disappointment in life.
Yeah. And that's why I think can only encourage both sides, candidates and firms, to be as transparent. My experience is it backfires if you try to gloss over certain aspects of a job, of a firm, of a team, and also be maybe the perspective of where things move for uncertainties, whether a certain part of the organization will also be there in 2 more years or whatever, right? These kind of prospects, as much as you're allowed to disclose them, you should talk about that and give you view, because it will pay back. It will if you don't, then it will definitely backfire at some point. That's my experience.
Transparency is key, and I hope we can remember that in the next couple of years as we implement AI and make sure that when we put that into hiring, that we know what it's doing, and keep everyone on board and on point. Paul, thank you so much for joining us for a great conversation with a wide range of topics. I had a great time, and I'm sure our audience did as well.
Thank you, Tim. It was great. And thank you for having me.